My name is Kevin Turner, and I am a registered professional forester, and I'm a licensed pest control advisor in the state of California. And I work on the invasive pest species for CAL FIRE. So I'm going to have to manually advance Beatrice, ask her to advance. So next screen, please. Beatrice, can you hear me? Okay. Abby, can you hear me okay, or Beatrice?
Hi, Kevin. We can hear you.
Okay, there's the next screen. Okay, I got it now. I see it. Okay. Okay, start off with, I also want to thank Jody. That was an excellent table setter, if you will, of a presentation for what I'm going to talk about, and I think what Bay will be talking about. GSOB, a gold spot oak borer, or GSOB, is a problem in California due to firewood. It is a non-native pest from Arizona, and it came here in firewood from Arizona. There is no quarantine to stop the movement of firewood in California. We don't see one on the horizon either. So we use primarily outreach and education to try to get the message out to firewood producers and firewood consumers and retailers about the dangers of moving firewood. Next slide, please. Okay, I don't see the next slide yet. It might be there's just a lag time. There we go.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag time, so if you just continue, Bay is able to move on to the next slide immediately.
Very good, I'll do that. Okay, GSOB, it's a brewstiped flat-headed borer, and in its home range in southeast Arizona, it's basically a non-factor, one of those insect pests that shows up times of drought or stress trees, that even attack stumps. But that is not the case once it was introduced into California. The oak species were different in Arizona, and the weather regime is much different, the more the monsoonal pattern versus the Mediterranean with the dry summers we have here. And the feeding of the beetle disrupts the phloem and that nutrient transport that Jody talked about. One good factor is that there's just but one generation per year, and that gives us some management implications. And typically when it attacks a tree, it can take multiple years to kill the tree, unless it's a really heavy attack, or some trees die as little as 1 year, but it can attack over successive years. Next slide, please. Now it attacks red oaks, what we call the red oak group. It primarily coast live oak and California black oak, but it also attacks canyon live oaks, one of the intermediate oaks. So that's what's at risk. A lot of the other oaks, the white oak species, do not seem to be at risk. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the threat potential. This map shows the threat potential of gold-spotted oak borer. You can see those bright orange colors. That's it could have a huge impact. And it was brought into San Diego. You see where it started down in southeast Arizona, or where it was native, and it didn't cross all that desert on its own, flying against the wind. We know it was brought to the southeast part of San Diego County by vehicle. Probably in the mid-90s, but it wasn't discovered until 2008. Next slide. Okay, because it's so easily transported in firewood and can be in that wood for over a year, up to 2 years, it's a huge risk to be spread over long distances. One pickup truck, load of wood, and a tank of gas can cover a lot of area. And it will spread on its own, but it is spread much faster in vehicles. And there can be natural barriers like deserts and things like that where we don't believe it's flying vast distances. So there's natural barriers, and sometimes the only way for it to cross those barriers is being transported. Next one, please. This next slide is just shows San Diego County. First discovered in 2008. It started there in the mid-90s, down there in kind of the southeast corner. Wood spread freely for all those years, and now almost all of San Diego, with the exception of this extreme northwest corner, are infested. Next slide, please. Okay, and then subsequently, GSOB was discovered in 2012 in Riverside County up in Idlewild, 2014 at Weir Canyon in Orange County, and in 2015, Green Valley up in LA. And it was believed all those introductions were as a result of firewood. We have some good evidence about that firewood moving from San Diego to those locations. And okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, GSOB is bark dependent. That's another management thing in our favor. So it's dependent for it to complete its life cycle. It's not really. It doesn't bore into the wood. It's there feeding in the phloem and in the cambium area of the tree. Next slide, please. Debarked wood is safe. It is not a threat to spread the beetles. I'm not sure if we've gone to the next slide. I haven't seen it yet. But okay, there's some examples of debarked wood. It's totally safe. You can move it. It's hard to do, though, however. Next slide, please. And once you remove the bark, the next trick is disposing of that bark properly, because those beetles will survive in that bark. We've got a video here. Let's see if we work it. If you go to the next one, Bea, I'm not sure if we have the video. There you go. That little pile of bark produced about 200 GSOB, and that was just bark that was knocked off incidentally when an amplifier tree was felled. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about management options. One of the primary things to do regarding GSOB, the single best thing you can do is to prevent it from coming into your area. But if it does get into your community and you have infested trees, we ask you not to move that infested wood and just spread the problem. Eventually, the beetles will come out of even the bark after 2 years. The next slide, please. One way to manage infested bark or infested wood is to it looks like I don't know if we jumped 2 slides, Bea, but I'll go ahead and cover this okay, no, I guess not. Go back. Thank you. So anyway, okay, we manage the infested wood, and then the next one, that slide with the gentleman on the tree, that is removing an amplifying tree. As over time, as a tree gets closer and closer to death, it seems to host more and more GSOB, and they can put out thousands of beetles. This one we estimate put out 4,000 beetles. Removing and disposing of those amplifying trees is very important. Otherwise, you're going to have beetles all over the place. Next slide, please. Oh, and once you have removed the wood, you can contain infested wood or bark. What works best actually is aluminum window screen, but that has to have very, very tight seams. In the smallest gap or tear, these beetles will exploit. And sometimes you can use plastic tarping to solarize pine bark beetles. That doesn't work very well at all with gold-spotted oak borer. They don't die from the heat, but they're a tropical related beetle. And also getting the plastic to last for 2 years, especially if it's not UV resistant, is very difficult. They're very susceptible to getting holes and tears, a pine cone falling on top of it. And the other issue is that mold forms on the wood, very bad if you do have the airtight seal that you need. Next slide, please. And this next slide is just showing some samples of dark bark removal processes using a chipper to pop off, or a splitter, I'm sorry, to split off the bark, using a saw of different kind to saw off slabs of bark, upper right-hand corner, and then you're running the slabs of bark through the chipper, which kills the beetles that are in the slabs of bark, and the bottom right is the bark-free wood, which is safe. Next slide, please. Now with whole trees, we started off grinding whole trees, and whole trees are very hard to do. Big oaks, big diameter oaks, and I failed to mention that, but gold-spotted oak borer prefer large diameter oaks versus small. They don't attack the small young trees, say under 8 inches, but the old trees are more susceptible to attack. They're slower growing. They can't heal over the damaged tissue as quickly. So it takes big, heavy machines like tub grinders to grind whole logs. It's very expensive because you have cutting and hauling costs, then tipping fees, and then you got to find some place for the chips. Next slide, please. And I think this next slide coming up is Oh, this is another option, is to cut the trees down where they stand, the infested trees, the amplifying trees, and then run them through this whole tree chipper, track lane chipper. They did this on the Angeles National Forest, and they were able to cut a lot of, or chip a lot of trees in very short order, not having to haul the trees anywhere, rather driving the grinder to the tree. The next slide, please. And we now want to talk a little bit about other control methods. The next slide is about biocontrol. Unfortunately, there is no biocontrol solution on the horizon for gold-spotted oak borer. And we don't see one coming. We've worked with the Center for Invasive Species Research at UCR. And even if we did, they don't feel it would give very much level of control at this point. We haven't given up totally, but there's no active work going on right now. Next slide, please. Now, you can use, consider pesticides for protecting high-value trees. We're never going to be able to wipe out GSOB or save a highly infested tree. But if you have an individual high-value tree or a few individual high-value trees, topical pesticides have proven to be effective. Somewhat so with the systemic pesticides too. There's problems and issues with both, and environmental concerns. So before anyone considers using pesticides, we encourage you to go to the GSOB website, pull up the Forest Insect and Disease leaflet that has information on chemical control of bark beetles, and read through that thoroughly before you make a decision. The next slide, please. And I mentioned the gsob.org, and that's where you can find a whole slew of resources. And it'll help you know what you can do and learn more about GSOB and some of the control measures. And also, so you start spreading the word about gold-spotted oak borer and the movement of firewood. Next slide, please. And then finally, we're asking you to get involved, become aware of what gold-spotted oak borer is and Prolificus shothole borer, some of the other invasives, and learn what to look for. We've gotten a number of volunteer groups. Fire safe councils, for instance, have been very good volunteer groups to go out and look for infested trees. They're also very good at spreading the word. Let your town council know, or community council, and you can get involved in detection, education, and even some mitigation projects. There's a number of fire safe councils that are applying for grants to help treat infested trees. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to hear my presentation. Again, I apologize for this kind of clunky effort. Whoops, that's just a slide that I wasn't going to have in there, but it does show different steps you can take when choosing firewood to avoid it. So anyway, here's my closing slide. Let's go to the last one, Bea, and that's just acknowledgments. And there's a number of people to acknowledge. I'll let you read that. And but also encourage you, if you have questions that don't get answered on this webinar, feel free to contact me at kevin.turner@fire.ca.gov. And with that, I will yield the screen back. Thank you.
Hello, can people hear me? I'm sorry, I'm having some technological hiccups over here.
Yes, we can hear you, Bea.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Kevin, for that presentation. I'm sorry I couldn't unmute myself before. Some weird stuff are happening over here, but I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very informative, as well as Jody's. So my name is Beatrice Noboa Berman. I go by Bea, so you might hear both names. And now I'm going to talk about another very important pest that is having a big impact here in Southern California, which is the invasive shadow borers that come together with the Fusarium dieback disease. I am, just to introduce myself, I work at the University of California Cooperative Extension here in Orange County, and I manage the invasive insect pest projects that we have here together with Orange County Parks. So the invasive shadow borers, as Jody already mentioned, are these very teeny tiny beetles. They're roughly the size of a sesame seed, and they are originary, in this case, from Southeast Asia. There's two species that are of concern here in Southern California, and they are the polyphagous shadow borer and the Kuroshio shadow borer. Each of them is associated with one or more fungi that they have a very tight relationship with. In the most common for both of them is fungi from the genus Fusarium, and they bring this fungi with them, and basically the fungi is the one who causes a disease called Fusarium dieback and causes decline and death, eventually death in your trees. Both of these species, the polyphagous and the Kuroshio shadow borer, are indistinguishable physically, so you need to do DNA or analyze the fungus in order to distinguish which one of them is attacking your trees. But because their effects are so similar and because they're so hard to distinguish, we usually consider them as a species complex, which is the invasive shadow borers here in Southern California, and we can basically consider them equal in terms of how to manage the infested trees. So as Jody said, a lot of these invasive insects are not specialized, and this is one of the cases, right? The invasive shadow borers have a long list of reproductive hosts. That means tree species in which they can successfully complete their life cycle and grow the fungus. And this list includes some of the very common native species that we have here, like the California sycamore, the red willows, most of the willows, oaks, white alder, and also some trees that are used a lot in landscaping, like the box elder, and economically important trees like the avocado. And because they're so generalist, that makes it a lot harder to work with them or to manage them, because now instead of having to put your resources in only a few species of trees, basically every urban and tree that is around here, or most of the trees that we have around here, can potentially be infested by this pest. The way the life cycle of the invasive shadow borers work is we start with a native female that has fungus spores that they carry with them. She finds a suitable tree and she digs a gallery inside the tree. Inside that gallery, she grows the fungus, which the beetles and the larvae use as food source. Inside those galleries, besides the fungi, she also lays her eggs, and those eggs will develop into new adult beetles. And then brothers and sisters would mate with each other inside the galleries, and again will end up with a mated female living those galleries. That makes it a little bit harder to control because these beetles are not ever looking for mates because they're already mated once they leave the tree. So we have a beetle that is always hiding inside the tree, so to speak. In most cases, when the beetle disperses, they end up on the same tree where they were born. So we have what we call amplifier trees, where we have different entry holes, one next to each other. And that is very common. They build up the population in one tree, and then once that tree dies, they disperse to the next trees around. So
Hello, Bea.
the area around the gallery is hello?
Sorry, we couldn't hear you for a second, but you're back.
Okay, so the arrow is the entrance of the gallery, and the stain area around the gallery, that's the area that's infested by the fungi. So the Fusarium infests the tissues around here. The beetle feeds on the Fusarium, and what happens is that the tree responds by clogging the vessels where the Fusarium is infesting, and that causes the tree to not being able to transport water, and you end up with dieback in the upper parts of the tree, and after some time you can have the complete death of the tree. So these beetles were thought to be introduced through wood products or shipping material from Southeast Asia. That happened, we think, in around 2003. At least that's when it was found for the first time. And since then, it wasn't a big deal until about 2013, when we started getting worried about it. And right now, the distribution of these two species in Southern California covers from San Diego County, where we mostly have Kuroshi Shaho border, to Orange County, Riverside, LA County, Ventura County, and Santa Barbara County, and one finding in San Luis Obispo. So as you can see, in just a few years, it was expanding quite a lot. And part of it is because the infestation expands on its own. They colonize close by trees, but also, for example, the Kuroshi Shaho bird that was here in San Diego in the south ended up somehow here in Santa Barbara. And so that gives us the idea that these beetles are using green waste or firewood to as hitchhikers to move to new locations and start new focuses of infestation. So to give you an idea of the kind of impact that these beetles can have, this is an example of what happened in the Tijuana River in San Diego County. This is how it looked in 2015. This is all willows, and this is how it looked in 2016, 9 months later. And all those willows died because of the effects of a shaho borer infestation. So, and all these impacts comes together with impacts not only on natural areas, but also in urban trees, and that comes together with economical impacts and health issues. So if we consider the species that we have as urban trees, we know that 33% of the urban trees are at risk of being infested. That means 23.2 million trees here in Southern California. If we only lose half of those trees, we'll get cost of almost $16 billion in removal and replacement of the trees, but also about $600 million annually as loss of ecosystem services, and all the health implications that come with not having trees and not having more air pollutants and more heat and water pollution. And the bigger problem is that if this pest makes it to Northern California, then we have another 100 million trees that are at risk of disappearing. So the way we know if this pest is around us is looking for symptoms of infestation. The most common symptoms is staining around the entry hole, but you can also see frass or sawdust coming out of the entry holes, or gumming, or some sugary exudate, which is very common in avocados. And all of these symptoms vary depending on the species of tree that the beetle is attacking. But in all cases, we always have an entry hole that is roughly the size of a medium-sized tip of a ballpoint pen. So whenever we're in doubt, putting a ballpoint pen next to the entry hole, it always helps having an idea if this is possibly shadow borer or not. In another way, to identify this, if we remove the first layer of the bark, we'll expose the entry hole, and we'll see living tissue, but the entry hole will be surrounded by darkened dead tissue, and that's another sign that we probably have shadow borer around. What we've been developing here and at UC Cooperative Extension, together with researchers from UC Riverside and other agencies, are different methods that we can use for integrated pest management of these pests. So the main thing that we need to do is try to find the infestation as soon as possible. So monitoring and surveying would be the best approaches. We can have traps with lures, or we can just go and look at the trees and find symptoms, the symptoms that I showed you before of the infestation of these pests. And in general, we consider the species of the host, so if the tree is a reproductive host or not, and how infested the tree is, what's the value of that host if it's a tree that is like a heritage tree or a tree we really care about, and the hazard level of the infestation. Because when the infestation happens in the branches, there's a big risk of the branches breaking and having damaging on people or property. And as for management options, in general, we encourage people to continue monitoring and finding the infestation as fast as possible, treating only infested trees. And we found out that non-infested, just preventive treatments are not really very effective. So it's better to monitor and start treating once you have some infestation. And for heavily infested trees, there's not much chance of them surviving. So we recommend remove all of those trees because they just carry so much disease in them. So many beetles are in that tree that removing them, you would just get rid of a big amount of beetles in the population. And very important, disposing that infested plant material in a correct way. So when we have infested material and we need to get rid of it, the best way of making sure that we don't carry this disease around is chipping to less than 1 inch. If you are in an infested area, you can use those chips on site as mulch. But if you're not, those chips need to get an extra treatment, which would be either composting or solarizing, or you can use them as alternative daily coverage in landfills. And if chipping is not an option, then if you have cut logs that are infested, they should be either kiln dried or solarized. This is very important because otherwise just cutting down the tree will just disperse the beetles that are inside the tree and will not get rid of the problem. And always, if we are relocating the infested material, make sure you cover it so you're not dispersing the pest around. As for other control options besides the cultural practices that I already mentioned, we have some chemical options that we've been developing. All of these options require someone that has an applicator license, so you need to contract an arborist to take care of this part. And then now we are trying to develop biological control options, including natural enemies and some entomopathogenic fungi and endophytic bacteria or fungi. And all of this is currently under research. Hopefully we'll have some answers soon, but this is more like a long-term strategy. And with this, I just want to share with you this link to pshb.org. That's our webpage that has a lot of information about this pest. and how to manage it, how to diagnose a tree. It has also contact information for you to contact us. All right, with that, I'll end up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. So I am going to be launching a poll. Hopefully you guys can all take part in it today. It should be appearing on your screens now. And we did have a couple of questions. One question came, I believe, for you, Kevin, and someone was asking if you could speak to early detection techniques for GSOB in landscape. Okay, Kevin, I unmuted you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So that was detection in landscapes. Basically, I didn't go into the signs of GSOB attack, but we need people to become familiar with what those signs are. In detecting in a landscape, you would be looking for trees with canopy decline. And typically, because GSOB takes several years to kill a tree, it's a progressive decline, and eventually the crown will die. If it happens to be black oak, which is deciduous, the leaf size gets smaller, and or you notice that the leaves don't abscise in the fall, or they don't come out in the spring. But just check gsob.org for more answers on that, how to detect it.
Thank you for that. And our second and last question is, how do UC, CAL FIRE, USFS, and other coordinate together on these issues? And what are their roles?
Well, this is Kevin. I'll be happy to start out on that one, and Bea or Jody or whoever can jump in also, because that's my role as coordinator for CAL FIRE. First off, there's multiple levels of coordination. We have it at somewhat at a statewide level, and then we have it down to a regional level. We have a Southern California Forest Pest Committee that discusses things at the regional level. And then we get down to county levels. We have a number of the counties have their own invasive pest groups, emerging tree pest groups, San Diego, Orange, Riverside, as some examples. And it's interagency groups that come together that are all concerned about shot-hole borer, gold-spotted oak borer, even new pests like the South American palm weevil that are a concern to all of us, because these beetles are crossing landscapes. They don't know the difference between property ownerships. And we found it really helps to collaborate together, to share ideas, to pool resources, to try to have influence. And so that's kind of the coordination role, is to keep each other informed. And one of the best things we have going for us is our outreach and education collaborative group. And so people interested in shot-hole borer, gold-spotted oak borer, whatever, they all participate in this outreach and education. We share training schedules, events like this, town hall meetings, whatever we're doing, we collaborate on that. We produce publications and things like that. But generally, it's a across all agencies collaboration and coordination that really makes it effective.
Okay.
This is Jody. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Jody. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was just going to comment from my perspective as a specialist, and so I do a lot of the things sort of that Kevin has just mentioned. In that within the UC spectrum, I work really closely. I'm on the Berkeley campus, but I work really closely with our county-based advisors that work in natural resources across the state, and so forestry, kind of a forestry perspective in the more Sierran counties, and then folks like Bee and Sabrina Drill that work in kind of conservation and various other aspects in Southern California. And working closely with the state agencies, I find really critical, just so people understand the work that you're doing and where it fits in the larger picture. And then because my emphasis tends to be outreach and research. And so I want to make sure I'm researching problems that people care about and that other people aren't researching. So it's really a coordination and a communication effort to make sure that sort of the right kind of attention is being paid to specific pests.
Great. One more thing I'm going to ask of our audience. I see that a lot of you voted other for how did you hear about this webinar. If you could just take a moment and comment those other ways that you heard of this webinar, we greatly appreciate it, just so we know how to get the word out there in the future for future webinars. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all for joining us. Oh, I see the comments coming in. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us. I'll make sure that my email is on the announcement page for this series in case you have any questions. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good day.